trilogies, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He's the author of several books, no other than Mr. Cody Engdahl.
Hello, everybody. Great to be back, Daniel.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Cody, and thank you for your time.
No problem, man. Thanks for having me. I really enjoy these talks.
Yes, and can you please again introduce yourself?
Sure, my name is Cody C. Engdahl. You can find me on Amazon. I am the author of I have a trilogy that takes place in the American Civil War. I write historical novels. And I also have my latest book, which is called Mexico, My Love, which is a prequel to that Civil War trilogy, but it's so much bigger than the Civil War. It, I mean, it starts in Europe, and we have an adventure that takes place in the deserts of northern Africa and the pirate infested seas, and then ultimately the Mexican American War, where it comes to a conclusion.
Yes, interesting, Mr. Cody. But before we go on to the prequel of the American Civil War, let's do the recap.
Sure. So I have a series. It's called the Second Michigan Cavalry Chronicles, and it's three books, and it's about basically a set of friends that are saying goodbye at the beginning of the war because one of them is going down to fight for the Confederacy, and the other two eventually end up in the Northern Army and the Union Army, and all three of them throughout the trilogy have their own adventures and and their paths cross multiple times. And throughout the whole trilogy, the real history of the American Civil War is told, especially in the Western theater. So every time you read about in my books, like if you read about real historical characters like General Grant, Nathan Bedford Forrest, Gordon Granger, those are all real generals, and all the so the way I portray them is basically who they were and how they were, and the battles are all that way. But then my characters are interwoven. But the interesting thing is the main character, Carl, he he's the one who's from Detroit and ends up in the Second Michigan Cavalry, Second Michigan Cavalry. And in the beginning of the first book, I set up a little bit about a mystery about his parents because Carl grows up only knowing that his father died in the Mexican American War. Never knew his father. There's a little bit of a mystery about who his father is that gets revealed in the Perils of Perryville. But then when we do the book Mexico, My Love, we basically go back and tell the story about how his parents met each other, fell in love, and then went on this great romantic adventure that ultimately ends in tragedy.
Interesting, people. So if you want to listen to our last episode, how he crafted the book, how make the book more interesting. So, Mr. Cody, Mexico, my love, what behind the title of your prequel?
So Mexico, My Love is, it's a line that is spoken in the book as well, but it's it sets up this story that is going to end in the Mexican War with the United States. And in the beginning, the two lovers meet each other in Europe. They meet in Marseille, France, and for the main character of this book, Claudette, who is the mother of the main character from the Civil War trilogy, um, when she first meets her this lover whose name is Diego, to her he represents something exotic, something far away, a life that's different from the mundane life that she leads in Marseille, and so she dreams about adventure and romance and this magical exotic mystical place called Mexico. Because if you can imagine this, this book takes place in like 1846 is where the main narrative starts. So to a young girl in France, Mexico, with its rituals, its music, its exotic people that came from an ancient warrior race, is something magical to her. So it's something to dream about. It's something to love.
Amazing, Mr. Cody. So, according to Lloyd Elmore Jr., sweeping epic tale. Oh, I love this. What are the elements did you put in the story that it's a
Well,
sweeping epic tale?
well, I think you know what, Daniel. I think you'll like this one because you told me last time we spoke that you're a fan like me of Alexander Dumas, who wrote the Three Musketeers and the Count of Monte Cristo. So I'm a big fan of the swashbuckler, of romantic heroes that are quick with a sword, and pirates and smugglers and all, and honor and duty and all those things. And so Alexander Dumas is in this book. He makes an appearance in the first part several times. He kind of, when we talk about the hero's journey, which I'm a big fan of, I don't adhere to it perfectly, but a lot of my books take that kind of classical hero's journey. Uh, Alexander Dumas appears in it as he is in Marseille doing research to write his book, The Count of Monte Cristo. And during his time, he's going to meet our main character, Claudette, who he likes to flirt with, but he also sees that Claudette has got her eye for another guy. But what's interesting about it is that there's a point, and Alexander Dumas kind of takes on the role of a mentor. He kind of is someone who sees through her and is able to give her the kind of wisdom and advice that she needs to hear. But in my book, she and her girlfriend go on a trip with Alexander to the Chateau d'If, which was originally a fortress, but then it became a political prison on an island just outside of the harbor there in Marseille. And so she goes on a trip, and he's going there because he's doing research for his book. So I thought it was really neat to put my own hero, because when I write, I try to evoke that same. I mean, he is the person I model myself after. So it was a huge honor to put him in my book. And it also paid off during the trilogy. She makes mention of him in my book, The Perils of Perryville. So this once again is me going and paying off a line that she said in her previous book, and then showing what really happened between her and Dumas. So I think you would really like that a lot.
Oh, yes, indeed. And according to Soma, fast and fun read. How fast the story is, Mr. Cuddy. I mean, the
It's
pacing and every twists and turns.
yeah. It's funny because the book is my longest book I've ever written. It's 124,000 words, so I think in print it's right around 500 pages. But I think what that reviewer probably means by that is that the book does. I write like Dumas, and Dumas didn't write novels. He wrote serials. He wrote stories, a serial story that it would appear in French newspapers on a weekly basis. So every episode of his novel, every chapter is like an episode that ends on a cliffhanger. So I do that a lot. I don't waste a lot of time. We get up and running with the plot right away, and right away there's intrigue, there's romance, there's danger, there's swashbuckling. So I think even though it's a big book as far as word count and pages, I think it reads pretty quickly. And I write my chapters so that like when I read Dumas, it's hard to just like read one chapter and go to bed. You're like, ooh, well, I want to know what happens next. I'm going to read the next one, and next thing you know, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and you should have gone to bed hours ago. I try to do that with my books as well.
Oh, oh, yes, indeed. Interesting, Mr. Cuddy. So, Mexico, my love. How did you crafted it?
I wrote it in 3 parts, and to be honest with you, each part could have been a novel into itself. I mean, probably would have made more money if I would have just put it out as 3 different books. But I wanted to tell it as one cohesive story. And so, as I told you before, I had set up a kind of a mystery about Carl's father in the Civil War trilogy that I wrote. And so the book starts out with a prologue, and it's Claudette, and she's now 40 years old, and her son is missing. Carl is missing. He went off to fight the war, and she doesn't know where he is. And she's about to go on a journey herself. And so she sits down and writes a letter to her son in case he ever comes home, because she says in the letter, "It's time you learned the truth about your father and how much I loved him and how much it hurt me to lose him." And then we go. That's the prologue, and then we go back to 1838, where Claudette is a little girl, and she has her fortune read, and she is told that she is destined to have this great love, but she's also destined to have her heart broken. And so because you already know that Carl's father is no longer around when you read the first book of the Civil War trilogy, it's kind of like a Greek tragedy where the characters all have a sense that this tragedy is coming. And so, and to make the tragedy real and make you feel it, that means the whole book has to be filled with just like joy and this adventure and romance and this love of life, and to make you not only love the characters Claudette and Diego, but love their love for each other. And it's these two kids that it's them against the world. It's an impossible love, but it's a love that both of them are fighting to keep, and they even go through struggles with each other. And so that when the tragedy comes, it hits hard. Because, and I had someone say, why that had to happen to Diego? Well, because it was written in the stars. It was written on the palm of her hand that the fortune teller was able to read when she was a little girl. And so then it jumps forward to 1846, and Claudette is getting ready for a ball, and that same fortune reader, who also happens to be her chambermaid, is helping her to get dressed, because Claudette is being set up to be married off to a wealthy nobleman. And this is post Napoleonic time, in which French nobility are beginning to reclaim their nobility and find their way back into the aristocracy. And of course, we know that France will eventually fall to another Emperor Louis Napoleon Bonaparte III. But that's not in this book yet. And so she is going to be married, or she's being set up to meet this guy, but everybody knows that she's supposed to be married to him, and she's a little resistant to it, because she's a frustrated girl. She lives on a vineyard. Her family were once noble, but through a succession of generations of being the second or third son and being married off to maybe wealthy merchants instead of nobility, they've kind of fallen out of nobility. So marrying Claudette off to a nobleman is the way of her family of bringing themselves back after the disaster of Napoleon I. And so, and this is where our villain comes in. And one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to create a great villain. And my villain in my Civil War trilogy was great. He was despicable, but you understood why. And I wanted to do something different. I wanted to create a villain that you would like. I wanted him to be handsome. I wanted him to be charming. I even wanted him to be a good friend to Diego, and possibly a good match for Claudette. But there's something underhanded. There's something beneath the surface of him seeming to be a perfect guy. And even throughout the novel, in his antagonism with Claudette and Diego, there's still parts about him that you like. Even the final duel between Diego and him. And by the way, I don't want to spoil anything, but even towards the end, the interaction between Diego and now I can't pull up Pierre, is you like him, and even though he can be despicable and a bad person, you understand where he's come from because he's a hurt person. So the first part of this book is, it's a very classic love triangle in which she's being set up to marry this guy, and he's this beautiful, handsome, wealthy man. Diego is going to school. He's Mexican. He's from California, which was once part of Mexico at that time. And when we meet Diego, he's being flogged by a monk at school in Barcelona. and and so the first thing we know is that he's a troublemaker. Well, that's going to end up with him causing more trouble and running away, and he's going to end up in Marseille, and he's going to end up at his friend's house, who is Pierre. And they're friends because they went to school together for a while in Barcelona, and then Pierre moved on to, graduate and came back home. And so Pierre is a really good friend to him because right now Diego is a fugitive because he's at the moment accused of trying to kill a clergyman in Barcelona, and the Spanish authorities are looking for him. At first it's like Pierre's like, God, what a great friend. He's going to help him out. He's going to take care of him. But really, Pierre has this underhanded thing going on. He's a smuggler. He's got basically he's buying weapons and selling them to the Mexicans, trying to start a war, trying to fuel the Mexican war effort against the possible fight against the United States. And he needs a strong man, and he knows that Diego is an excellent fighter, and kind of uses him. But what happens is, unfortunately, at some point, Diego and Claudette are going to meet because Pierre is wooing her, and that's where the sparks kind of fly, and all breaks loose, and all sorts of trouble happens, and we have great sword fights, and we have great adventures. The French gendarmes are chasing them. The law authorities are chasing them. British smugglers are causing them trouble. All sorts of things, all while this love triangle happens, and that's really all part one. And that could have been a book into itself.
Wow, truly an epic love story, Mr. Cody.
Yes, and that's just the beginning of it. That's just the beginning.
I hope that the ending will be better and better and better.
It is, and I'll tell you what, it's tragic, and I want to make. I hope that when you read it, you laugh. Sometimes you're scared. Sometimes you cheer. Sometimes, but I hope to break people's heart with you. This is not a traditional romance with a happy ending. This is tragedy. Part two is what happens after the adventure in Marseille. They're going to end up in northern Africa, where they get involved with the Franco-Algerian War and the Franco-Moroccan War, and they're going to meet the very real, just like they met Alexander Dumas in the first part. In part two, they're going to meet Abd al-Qadir, who was a famous resistance fighter against the French invasion of Algeria and Morocco, and there. Diego is going to learn more. He's going to become part of that fight, and he's going to learn more about. He's already a great swordsman, but he's going to learn more about cavalry and guerrilla tactics and all that. They're eventually going to find passage because all he wants to do is get back home to Los Angeles, where he's from. To face his father because he's in a lot of trouble because he ran away from university and he almost killed a monk. They're going to cross the ocean where I don't want to give too much away, but they're going to get tangled up in the illegal international slave trade and pirates. And so, it's not a swashbuckler if you don't have pirates. And by the way, this pirate. Let me just say that the pirate they meet may be someone that has been mentioned a few times during the trilogy, and people who have read the trilogy may make a connection like, oh, wait a minute, is this that character that I heard them talk about many times? So I don't want to give too much away, but also this character, this pirate, may be the main character of not the book I'm writing now, but the next book I write. I'm going to do a whole book about him. So he's a great character. The third part is they finally get through all that, and they end up meeting Santa Anna, who led the Mexican forces during the fight. He helps them to get back to Mexico, where he enlists Diego, and Diego goes up to California, where he's from, to try to enlist a regiment of Mexican Lancers. Now, Lancers, really famous, and this is a really interesting thing. I want to circle back to this, but Mexican Lancers were a form of cavalry that still used spears from horseback, even though they're black powder muskets and all that kind of stuff. They were very brave, and they were quite formidable against the American troops that were fighting in California. So they're going to be involved. Diego goes back to face his father. It doesn't go very well. His father does not approve of him. By the way, they have a child along the way, which is Carl, who's the main character of the Civil War trilogy. But he's just a baby in this book. Diego raises a troop of, outlaws and thugs, basically, to fight against the Americans, and he gets involved in that fight, which is traditionally called the conquest of California. And eventually, when California falls, he's going to go back to Mexico City, and there they will fight the decisive battle. We build up to it, but he will participate in the final battle of Mexico City, in which the Americans take the castle of Chapultepec and then march on the gates of Mexico City itself. And that's pretty much where there's some fighting after that, but that's once the Americans sack the capital, it's all over for the Mexicans. It's kind of interesting is Ulysses Grant, who is the U.S. general in the American Civil War, he makes a cameo in that fight as well. It's fun to bring in real historical characters into the novel, and also I always make sure that, like, when I'm describing Chapultepec, the castle, or when I'm describing the fighting there, I am following beat by beat the real battle that went on. So when you read about these things, you're really getting the real history. It's just that my characters and their super swashbuckling romantic story is just interjected into that greater story.
Mr. Cody, truly an epic and a love story that you shared to us. But before we go on, I want to shout out to the people listening, of course, in Mexico.
Yes, Viva la Mexico.
Viva la Mexico. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, mis amigos.
Yes. Mexico City, I got 86% audience share. Thank you so much. Muchas gracias todos. Jalisco at 4%. Nuevo León, Mexico, Guerrero, Puebla, Baja California Sur, Sonora, Querétaro, Hidalgo, Estado de Mexico, Yucatan, I don't know how to pronounce it, Michoacán.
Yeah, some of those are, Aztec names. Yeah, they're really hard.
Tamaulipas, Quintana Roo, Sinaloa, Baja California, Chihuahua, Aguascalientes, Osaka, Zacatecas, Guanajuato, Veracruz, and last but not the least, Coahuila.
Quiero decir.
Sí, señor.
Quiero decir que este libro es una carta de amor para el cultura mexicano. This book that I wrote is a love letter to Mexican culture, and
yes,
it was very important for me to tell that story. Most people, I'm an American, I'm from Detroit. Most most novels that you get about the Mexican-American War are always from the American perspective. And of course, I love my country and all that, of course. But I wanted to write a book that took you from the perspective of the Mexicans and to get deep, not only just Mexican and Spanish culture, but the native cultures of Mexico as well, and to delve deep into um, uh, Aztec mythology as well. And we make mention. I can't say the name right. The serpent of the plumes, Quetzalcoatl. I
Yeah.
make reference to him, and there's a character in it. He's an old man. He is a servant to. He's been a servant in Diego's family for generations. He's mute. He doesn't talk, but he's an old, native of, American native man from Aztec descent. And in the final battle, he goes complete. He decides that this is the battle. My favorite chapter in this is called "The Feast of the Gods," and Chapultepec, the hill Chapultepec was the site of an Aztec temple in which they performed human sacrifice. And of course, to the Aztecs, gods require an enormous amount of human blood to keep them happy, so they don't destroy the world. And so the Aztecs were constantly feeding the gods blood on that hilltop. Now, when the Spaniards came, they tore that down and built a chapel there, and then later on they built Chapultepec Castle, and that's where this big battle happens. And so that chapter is called "The Feast of the Gods" because there's a lot of bloodletting there. And one of them is Bernardo, who's an old man who decides this is his moment. This is his moment to go to Aztec paradise. And so he strips down to his loincloth and he cuts open a snake and paints himself in snake blood and dresses himself in eagle feathers and gets out his in obsidian encrusted war club that the Aztecs use and goes to fight as a proud Aztec warrior. And that's part of that. There's a whole lot of sacrifice that goes on in that chapter. And that was one of them. And that to me was like a nod to that old faith and that old idea that the Aztecs had, and it happened on their hill where they once did that.
Yes, indeed. So, Mr. Cody, Mexico, my love, what do you think? Best highlight.
I gotta say, I really love that chapter. The Another one of the sacrifices is anybody who's Mexican or familiar with Mexican culture will know of the famous Niños Errores. These were cadets that, at the time of that battle, Chapultepec was a military academy. And when it became evident that the Americans were going to assault it, they sent all the cadets back into the city because they didn't want them to be there when the fighting happened. But I think about 50 of them basically insisted on staying and fighting for their country and defending their country. And 6 of them died. And one of them, Juan Escutia, Juan Escutia, this is a famous story, and it's in my book. When the Americans come over the walls, Juan decides he doesn't want them to capture the flag. So he goes and he gets the Mexican flag and he leaps to his death with the flag. He jumps 200 feet so that the Americans can't get it. And that's a very famous story. And if you go to Mexico City, there's murals showing Juan leaping to his death with the flag. And very interesting story. So President Truman was the first American president to visit Mexico after the Mexican-American War. And when he did, he went to the cenotaph that was erected for the Niños Errores, the 6 children that died fighting the American invasion. And he laid a wreath there, and he had a moment of silence. And a reporter said, "Why? They were our enemy at the time." And he said, because I recognize courage anywhere I see it, and brave men belong to no one country, and I believe I agree with him, and you know the way I write, I don't I don't really write about good guys and bad guys. I feel like there's always good guys and bad guys. Maybe one nation is probably in the wrong, but doesn't mean that everybody that fights for him is wrong. And so, like, and likewise, I don't make the Americans, you know, my countrymen, out to be absolute villains either. But I think it's important to see the humanity, especially when you write about war. It's not just robots wearing uniforms blowing each other away. It's real people that have real motivations, and you know, and have real dreams and fears and hopes and loves, and that's kind of the theme that is in all my writing.
Yes, Mr. Cody, interesting. So let's
Thank
talk
you.
about the main characters. Oh,
Yeah.
Mexico, my love.
Yes. Okay. So Claudette is one, and you meet Claudette um, in my Civil War trilogy. So, and during that time, she's the mother of the main character. So she's an older lady. She's kind of dark. She's a little obsessed with, you know, during the 19th century, there occultism was very popular. I mean, even amongst like Christians and Catholics, you know, she's a Catholic, but she's you know, she as a little girl, she gets a mentor that teaches her about like palm reading and tarot card reading and crystal balls. So she's kind of obsessed with that. And the way I write is that, you know, magical things could be real, or they could. I write it so that the reader, could decide, are the things that seem to be spiritual and magical, are they real, or are they coincidence? I leave that up to you. You can decide what you think is happening. But she's a little bit of nod. You know, of course, I'm writing to a modern audience, so she's a little. The way I would describe her is like the modern goth girl. She's dark haired, dark eyed. She's passionate. She's a little. She's got a little bit of a temper. When things when she's kind of, when things aren't going her way, she can kind of put her foot down and be very forceful. She starts off as a girl who, she's an only child, who grows up on a vineyard, who's been kind of kept away from society and is bored and just wants to have romance and true love. Diego is comes from a generations of noblemen of Spanish origins. Now he's half. He's mixed race. His father's a Spaniard. I'm sorry. Is that right? His father's a Spaniard. His mother is a native Californian, and of you know, Aztec descent. And his grandfather, and I make mention this of a lot. His Diego's grandfather was a famous swordsman, of mythical legend, who's considered to be a hero to many people. And so he grows up wanting to be like his grandfather, because his father, Ramon, wants nothing to do that. Ramon is a businessman. He wanted his son to not fall for the same kind of follies that ended his grandfather's life. He wanted Diego to grow up to be a responsible businessman. Well, Diego's rebellious, and Diego's a romantic hero who wants to have a, you know, romantic, adventurous, swashbuckling, sword fighting life, like his grandfather, like the legend of his grandfather. And in fact, when he goes back to California, he's going to meet up with some of the old men that once rode with his grandfather, who are going to, including Bernardo, um, who are going to team up with him and help him build his team of lancers. Oh, I wanted to circle back about lancers. This is very interesting. So the Mexicans had lancers in their cavalry during the Mexican-American War, and so during the American Civil War, there were Texans there were lancers in the Texas cavalry during the American Civil War that were emulating the Mexicans during that war. And I'm writing a book right now that takes place in the Austro-Prussian War, and the Austrians also had men dressed up as Mexican lancers during that war. because at the time, the brother to the Austrian emperor, Maximilian, was sitting on the throne in Mexico. So there were Austrian men during the Austro-Prussian War dressed up like Mexicans fighting with lances in 1866. It's just all this stuff is connected. It's very interesting.
What a characters indeed, Mr. Cody. So, Mexico, my love, if you want to go back and revise the book itself, which part of the book you want to revise?
I wouldn't change a thing. I wouldn't change a thing. I've been through it. I do a lot of editing as I write. When I finish each chapter, I go back and edit it. Then when I finish each section, I do that. And I am very happy with this book. It's my favorite book. I mean, I love all my books, but this one is really the culmination of a lot of things that I had been working on, and it paid off a lot of things that I had set up in the trilogy. And it's not over yet, because the book I'm writing now is not only a sequel to the trilogy, but it also ties up some loose ends from this book as well. Here's a special deal. If you're a Kindle reader, this book is going to be, it's normally $4.99 for the Kindle version. Starting on Tuesday, June 27th, 2023, it's going to be 99 cents for 7 days. So you have from Tuesday all the way up through the 3rd of July if you want to get it at a great deal. Why do I do that? Because I'm hoping that you read that for 99 cents, love it, and then go read the trilogy. So there's a special offer, special deal. If you're listening to this right now and it's still in good time, it's only 99 cents for the next week.
Yes, people.
Yeah, that'll probably be another year, but yeah, we're gonna. So in the beginning of this book, The Mexico My Love, it starts with that prologue where Claudette is going back to Europe and leaving a letter for her son. So the book I'm writing now is called The Prussian Prince, in which Carl, who's been the main character of the Civil War trilogy, it's the end of the American Civil War, and he wants to go. All he wants to do is he wants to be done with war. He wants to go home back to Detroit and be with his wife. And he gets home and he finds out that his wife happened to be pregnant from the last time they were together. And she and his mother have gone back to Germany because Carl's his wife is a German immigrant. And since he's gone and no one knows what happened to them, they go back to Berlin so that she can have the baby with her family. Carl is on this, kind of like the Odyssey. Carl is on this Odyssey to go back to return to his wife. But when he gets to Germany, well, he's got an enemy there that's waiting for him, and it's going to get him tangled up in a clash of empires, in which is going to include not only the Austro-Prussian War, but the Franco-Prussian War as well. And these are the wars of German unification, where Prussia consolidates its power and creates a German empire that will eventually be, the German empire that we fight in World War One.
Yes, interesting. So, Mr. Cody, Mexico, my love, what do you think the flaws?
The flaws. I'm sorry. I just don't really see any. I maybe that's my own hubris. I will say that I've gotten really good reviews on it. Everybody who's read it has loved it and have said it's my best work yet. What's interesting is a lot of things changed. I think we talked about this before. When I start with a kind of a rough outline, a rough I plot, but I keep it kind of loose. So it did not end the way, it ended the way I knew it was going to end in tragedy, but it didn't. Things happened in it that I didn't realize was going to happen until I got deep into the research and said, like, for example, Abdel-Kader is a fascinating character. And if you like him in the book, in the end of the book is a historical note where you can read more about like the historical aspects. And Abdel-Kader is a very famous man. There is a town called Al-Qaeda in Iowa that's named after him. The French, even though he fought against them, ended up giving him the honorary, let's see, the Legion of Honor award. The Pope knighted him. Abraham Lincoln sent him 2 engraved pistols for his bravery. And I'll tell you why. Real quick story. This is not in the book, but later on, Abd al-Qadir, he's defeated by the French. They gave him a deal to go into exile, but they reneged and they threw him in prison instead. Well, a lot of ex-military Frenchmen fought for his release because they said, this is an honorable man. This man treated us, when we were prisoners, treated us with honor and dignity and kindness. And so finally, Abd al-Qadir, after spending years in prison, is allowed to go free and live in exile in Damascus. Well, years later, I think it's right around somewhere in the 1860s, there was a massacre. There's a anti-Christian riot in Damascus in which 3,000 Christians are killed, slaughtered in the street. Well, Abd al-Qadir is a Muslim cleric, and he, when this started happening, he mounted 40 of his warriors, and they went out into the streets and they found every single Christian they could find, and brought them back to his compound, his estate, and there they defended them from the mobs. And there's a famous there's an account of a Frenchman who says that they were surrounded, and just at the moment they thought they were going to die, here comes Abd al-Qadir, sitting tall and handsome on his and calm on his horse, like an angel sent from God to save them. And the whole world was like, this man's a hero, and he is a hero. And if you go to Algeria today, you can go to a museum, you can see the pistols that Abraham Lincoln sent him, plus all these other accolades, including the Merit of Honor from France. And he was knighted. He's a knight of the Order of Pope Pius IX. Fascinating guy, fascinating, and you know, like Harry Truman said, heroes don't belong to any country. And I see bravery. You know, I recognize bravery when I see it. And Abd al-Qadir is a hero to all people. And so things like that I didn't account for, that I didn't realize I was going to do. I didn't realize I was going to do the Conquest of California until I started getting deeper into the book and said, okay, this is the direction I got to go. We got to do. And once again, there's a lot of books written about the Mexican-American War, but most of it is about, the march on Mexico City. But my book goes deep into the Conquest of California, which not a lot of people cover that. Absolutely, we're seeing it happen right now. For example, we've seen the attempted coup with Prigozhin, where he, mercenary army decides to turn on Moscow. And if you look at, I've been talking about this a lot, and but if you look at like the Russo-Japanese War, the Russians were doing horribly in that war. A lot of Russians were being killed for no good reason, and it ended in a revolution, the Revolution of 1905, in which the Russian people, there was a coup, and they forced a constitutional monarchy on Tsar Nicholas II. 12 years later, the Russians are doing very poorly in World War I, and Russian soldiers are being killed by the millions. I mean, they're sending men out there without shoes or even weapons. They were telling them, just pick up the weapon of the dead guy next to you when one comes available. Well, there was the October Revolution, and they toppled the Tsar, and he ends up getting a bullet to the brain in the basement of a cabin somewhere. We fast forward to today, and the Russians have not been doing a good job. Whether which side anybody is on, everybody has to admit that the Russians, the fight in Ukraine is not going well. All their veteran troops have been killed, their veteran officers. Now they're sending conscripts out there. And once again, there are Russians out there, Russian soldiers with no shoes, with no food, no ammunition, no armor, no night gear goggles. Meanwhile, the West is supplying the Ukrainians. Wagner, Prigozhin, who's no angel himself, had enough and turned his forces and were marching on Moscow. Now that has come to a quote unquote peaceful resolution. We'll see what happened, but we see the cracks. And when Russia does not do well in a war, and when their citizens, their conscripted citizens, are dying by the thousands, it usually a regime change is on the horizon.
Very well said, Mr. Cody. So,
Thank
can
you.
you please invite our listeners to buy all your books?
Yes, please. I invite you to buy all my books. If you can tell, I'm a very passionate person, and I put that into my book. My my biggest goal, my number one goal, is for you to have a good time. I believe that entertainment should be escapism. It should be. My book should make you laugh. They should make you angry at sometimes. They should fill you with joy. They should make you want to be there. They should make you cry at the same time. At this While trying to do that, which I think I do, I also want to be a steward of history. I know that a lot of people aren't going to get uh, aren't going to learn the real history of the Mexican American War. So it is upon me to make sure that if I'm the only place you're getting it from, then I better get it right. So I think as a historical novelist, I have an obligation to do that. I can write in the cracks. I can create characters like Diego and Claudette and put them and interweave their story into the real history. But nothing I write should be able to be proven wrong. So if I give you historical things like the way the battle goes or historical characters, that's because that's how they really are. When you meet Santa Anna, which you will in my book, he's pretty much the way I depict him because I've done the research. I've actually read Santa Anna's um, personal memoirs called The Eagle that he wrote himself. And what's funny about it is, he's a liar, he's a self-aggrandizer, he's a propagandist. But when you read his own account of his own deeds, it really gives you a flavor of the way he thinks, the way he talks, the way he carries himself. So when you take his memoirs and you compare them to the real history, you can really flesh out a true man. And um, I love flawed people. Like, Santa Anna is a complex, flawed person. In my Civil War trilogy, Nathan Bedford Forrest, who's considered to be a villain by a lot of people, is a flawed and complex man. And I like writing about characters like this. It's interesting to me. I tell you, I told my girlfriend, who's my de facto wife, I said, honey, my last book, you're going to have to get somebody to finish it because I'm not going to stop writing until I die. And we started with the trilogy. I'm never going to stop. We started with the trilogy. They're all interconnected. I'm writing the sequel to the trilogy and Mexico My Love. After that, I have a book about a pirate. It's called Black James. I have ideas after that are continuations of either continuations of this main story or going and doing books about particular characters. I have ideas that will take us all the way up into the First World War. I have a Second World War story I want to do. I even have stories that I want to do that take place in the 70s and the 80s. I also want to go back in time and go back to do some other time periods, but I'll never live long enough to write all the books. And so
Yes.
I promise you, if you jump in on my train here and read my books and you like them, that I'm always going to be writing for you. I'm always going to be putting stuff out, and I'm always going to be continuing the story. That's my
Yes,
job.
people. So, Mr. Cody, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Daniel.
But come, people, see you soon.